Welcome everyone to the third annual Omer Aliyah, a 7-week spiritual boot camp of personal elevation, or simply known as TOA. My name is Nuriel Shor. Thank you for tuning in to the Netzach seminar of our 7-week empowerment series. TOA, in essence, is a global grassroots movement for every Jew around the world to use the power of Sfirat Omer to reveal our individual and collective greatness. Inside each of us is a light waiting to be unleashed, and by systematically rectifying spiritual blockages, with Hashem's help, we will not only transform into the greatest versions of ourselves, but will also generate blessing for the world. Iteruta del Tata, iteruta del Ela. Our actions below will cause actions on high. By embarking on this journey together, we travel in time from Pesach to Shavuot, forming a global collective consciousness of Ish Echad Belev Echad, one person with one heart, just like our people experienced over 3,300 years ago at the base of Har Sinai. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize our sponsors and community partners who are part of this grand vision. For more information about being a sponsor, community partner, or about TOA in general, please reach out at omaraliyah@gmail.com. We are currently in the week of Netzach and have the pleasure of learning from Rebbetzin Rachel Bookstein. Rebbetzin Rachel is the co-founder and director of Pico Shul and has worked with her husband, Rabbi Yonah Bookstein, to create innovative educational and social programming around the world for the past 28 years. Serving as Director of Community Development in Poland for the Ronald S. Lauder Foundation, she inspired and educated a new generation of Polish Jewry. Rachel's dedication to providing educational opportunities and empowering women in former communist Eastern Europe made her a leading figure in Polish Jewish rebirth. Some of Rachel's California projects have included the Jewlicious Festival student weekends, Camp Neshama YP retreats, Shabbat Tent programs that bring radical Jewish hospitality to music festivals, and more. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping remarks. This seminar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the TOA YouTube channel. I will then stop the recording, after which we'll have an opportunity for open and confidential conversation with Rebbetzin Rachel. May Hashem bless the Omer Aliyah and all who are involved so that we may experience individual, collective, and global Geula speedily in our days. I now hand it over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Nuriel, and thank you to everyone supporting the Omer Aliyah and all the teachers who have come before and the teachers that are going to continue for the rest of the 7 weeks. And everyone who's here, obviously. I just want to acknowledge that, today's a difficult day for the Jewish people. There's been some bad news, so I want to dedicate our learning to Refuah Shlema for all of the Cholim, of course, all over the world, but especially those in Israel who are hurt defending the Jewish people and the land of Israel. So in addition to every other, worry on our heads and hearts, I want us to all take a second to think about that, and then also open our hearts to learning in joy and not in sorrow or worry. So thank you again for inviting me to talk about the topic of Netzach, which is, a whole week is devoted to it. So, it's an overwhelming source of interest and commentary and thought, but I narrowed it down to a few ideas, and I hope it'll be helpful. It has certainly been fun for me to prepare some thoughts to share. So Netzach is the first of the qualities of the Omer that brings us into the world of action. The ideas that made up the first 3 weeks were in the realm of ideas and the realm of thought, and now we're moving into action. And most of the definition people use or apply to Netzach as it functions in the context of the Omer are concepts of victory and of eternity as well as determination and resolve, as qualities that we bring into our thoughts this week. And also in the Jewish tradition, it's very common to find that we kind of pin a quality upon a character, a leader, a person from our tradition. And so the tradition says that Moshe Rabbeinu was the archetype of Netzach, of victory and of endurance and all of these things. But at this very same time that Moshe is the archetype, he's also the anti-type. He plays against typecasting because he's also the most humble. And actually the opposition between this idea of leadership and moving forward and establishing things and being determined to be connected with the idea of humility gives us actually an insight into what leadership should actually be. And actually, his leadership was predicated upon his ability to be humble, both in the face of Hashem in the world, and also the responsibility that was given to him by Hashem for the Jewish people. So when we talk about victory, we're not specifically talking about military victory, and nor are we specifically talking about something simple as, winning a game, right? This is not the kind of victory we're specifically talking about, although it does come into it in the way that Netzach gets enacted in the world. So, what this teaches us, first and foremost, is that when we, during this week, are activating, as we try to activate Netzach in ourselves, and we move from the idea of spiritual contemplation, all of the deep and high thoughts of the past 3 weeks, we want to move into action. We need to be very careful that when we activate Netzach, when we activate this for ourselves, that Netzach, leadership and decisiveness, needs to be balanced in our lives. And without the balance of humility, the drive for victory, to act upon the world and exert our will upon the world, can lead Netzach to fall into some very bad places and lead to some very bad results. So fallen Netzach, as we see, leads to bullying and dogmatic thinking and autocratic systems. So in what way can we possibly experience this Netzach in our lives? Because most of us don't feel like we're operating on the level of high spiritual relationship with taking care of the entire Jewish people, or of listening to Hashem face to face, as Moshe Rabbeinu did. But a small way we can understand this is when we talk about our relationships with others. And for some of us, an easy example can be with our children or our students. Raising and educating children in the dynamic relationship, parents and teachers have a Netzach hold over their children. And the way we need to enact it is obviously with clarity of purpose and with meaningful guidelines and guardrails for our children. And yet we also have to have this humility to see that the needs of the moment and the needs of the child, who they are in front of us. And if we don't do this, if we just push through to our goal as we have decided it to be, without humility, without seeing what's in front of us, we actually fail. We fail at the mission we've been given. We fail at our responsibilities. And we actually have to then figure out how to lift that fallen Netzach to actually serve us again, which is actually part of Netzach, which is the endurance part. It's like when you fall, what do? You get back up, right? So built into the concept of Netzach is succeeding out of a place of fallenness or out of a place of failure. And so nobody should worry because we all make mistakes, and we all first and foremost have to forgive ourselves and find the energy to get back up and try it again. But to know that this week, actually, the idea of action in the face of adversity is part of what is built into this week's meditations and this week's ideas. So we're halfway through, almost halfway through the Omer. Week 4 is this kind of pivot, this fulcrum point. As And, you know, I think obviously, you know, Riel and everyone who's been on this journey knows that everything builds, and you see interconnectedness between the aspects as you go week to week, and you build up and you ladder up all the different ideas from one week to the next, and then they repeat or they flip. But we just need to remember that as we're building, you know, this inner light and life that we've been focusing on, now we have the opportunity to, let's say, apply them to the material elements of the world and these attributes of the Omer. I'm going to take a drink of water. I'm so sorry, my mouth is very dry. So just to clarify, you know, the interconnectedness, just in case anybody isn't familiar with this idea, the idea of the soul and the body being interconnected in Judaism is an essential concept. Other traditions have it very differently, that the soul and the body are at odds with each other. And which doesn't mean to say that in Judaism there isn't a conversation between the body and the soul, but the interconnectedness of the body and the soul in this world is essential. And how do we know that? We know that very simply because a body without a soul is a corpse, and a soul without a body is a ghost, in colloquial terms, right? So that the world is meant to be a place, the world that we live in is meant to be a place where the body and the soul live together and work together and build together, and sometimes disagree with each other, but are in conversation always. And so, you know, sort of moving on from that, when we're living in we're as a neshama inhabiting a body, or we're a body hosting the neshama, which is both true. When we're talking about action, there's various ways it can happen. We can do things, which is carrying out actions in the world. We can speak, which is to communicate ideas or emotions. And we can think. And the thinking is a unique human way in which we take ideas that don't exist and we bring them into the realm of possibility through action and speech. But we also have another power. And actually, this is what I would call a superpower, which is that we have the ability to want, to desire. We have free will, right? What is free will if not the enabling of our to us to exercise wanting something, longing for something, yearning for something. And, you know, this idea always in Jewish thought is what we're really yearning for is a connection. We're yearning for a connection to Hashem, which is our source. And we're yearning for a connection with other people, because our relationship with other people in many ways is a mirror to our relationship with Hashem, with our creator. And we know this because when we think about our neshama, there's lots of beautiful poetic ways the Jewish people have come up with describing the soul. But everybody agrees that the neshama is a gift from Hashem, and it's also a part of Hashem. And this is a kind of a paradox, because Hashem gives us our neshama, and it lives wherever, I don't know. I mean, if you could point to your neshama, I don't know, where would you point to? Some people point here, some people point here, some people point to their gut. Depends on how they feel, how they operate, their psychology. But let's just say for the sake of argument, the neshama is somewhere here, like around the physical body. Otherwise, it's hard to even talk about. But let's say the neshama is part of here. So if we know that something's infinite, when you take something from the infinite, what happens to the infinite? Nothing. The infinite is still infinite. So if Hashem is giving us something and it becomes part of us, then Hashem is not depleted. We are just merely filled. But then we have to realize, like, well, if I'm have a part of Hashem in me and Hashem is infinite, then isn't everything part of Hashem? Yes, except that we don't experience it that way on a regular basis. And that is also part of the way Hashem created the world, which is actually a challenge for most of us most of the time, is that we don't get to experience the interconnectedness of everything. I'm sorry, I didn't snooze on my alarms, but anyways, I'll keep going. So because we know the soul seeks to connect with the divine as it seeks to connect with others, which are aspects of the divine, and it's the seat of our will, then our highest level of being is when we aim to align our will with the will of Hashem. And this is actually part, I think, of the discipline of the Omer, is trying to align yourself with different aspects and elements that will bring you closer to some understanding of the way Hashem operates in the world and has built the world for us to operate in. And when we look at this, we're bringing our actions of connectedness and kindness into the world. And that is the Tselem Elohim, the image of Hashem within all of us. And it is the way we most resemble God. So how do we know we're doing it right, or if we're doing it right at all, seeking this connection? So I'm a firm believer that if Hashem created the world in a certain way, it's not by accident. So one of the things we can look at are human interactions as a way of reflecting on insight that Hashem wants to give us about the world. Because if it wasn't organized that way, it wouldn't be, right? Human nature would be different. The way the world works would be different. Gravity could be, everything could be different if it was Hashem's will. So we have to assume, right, axiomatically, that the operating principles of the world are as they should be, and they're there for us to learn from. So if the goal is to seek connections, so let's see what happens when we miss the mark in this world, in our relationships, when we exert a certain amount of Netzach, a certain amount of authority or determination or leadership in a way, and we miss the mark, right? We're in a fallen or, lower level of Netzach. Maybe we don't totally fail, not totally fallen, but we don't actually hit our highest level. And this takes the form in everyday life in the ways we criticize the people we love, or the way we speak to the people we love. We say things like, don't drive so fast, because we don't want them to get hurt. And we say, oh, don't wear that out of the house, because we don't want them to be embarrassed by other people saying not nice things. Or we say, didn't I already tell you that 100 times to our child? Because we want them to move into the world with knowledge. And we realize very often, even as we're doing it, we miss the mark. And interestingly enough, many people know that the idea of a sin in Judaism is a liken to a person aiming with a bow and arrow and missing the mark. So when we do something like that, when we're unable to clearly express our love and it comes out as criticism and we think of it as missing the mark, we see what happens with the other person, right? Very, very clearly in this world, what usually happens is someone turns away from us, or they fight back, or they freeze, right? And so these are the classic responses. And what can we do in response to them? We can escalate the fight, we can fight back, or we can repeat ourselves because we think they didn't understand us. That's why they're standing there frozen. Or we can chase them if they've turned away. And so these are human interactions. But what we find with Hashem is that Hashem does want our apology, does want our tshuva, but the tshuva is for us. The turning around that tshuva gives us is really not for Hashem's benefit, it's for our benefit. The apology is for our benefit, because Hashem is there ready to fill that void that was made when we turned away or when we missed the mark and we pushed our connection away, when we denied our connection, by acting in a way that wasn't aligned with really the best of our own will, when aligned with Hashem, would want us to be doing. And of course, we all know that what Hashem at the source, at the core, is, the universe was built out of kindness. So if we're missing that mark, then we can see it if our actions are cruel or if our actions harm other people. And so that's also a check on our own Netzach that we need to be aware of. And actually, I thought I was teaching at noon, so I was talking about Chesed Netzach. So I'm focusing a lot on kindness, but I do believe it carries out throughout the week, and is a good starting place to think about Netzach as you go forward. And what we have when we have a void with a person, when we've made a separation between ourselves and another person through not acting kind, or misaligning what we say with what we actually mean to say, which is usually, I love you. Will you stay with me? Will you take care of me? Let me take care of you, right? Those are what we actually mean, but most of the time it comes out as a criticism. And the cycle that sets up when we do it correctly is actually a guide for how we can build our relationship with Hashem, especially if we're feeling distant. Obviously, the first thing to recognize is the distance is of our own making. So the cycle goes something like this, that if we can transcend our self-interest in the service of others, we can connect to others. And when we do this, we expand our awareness of Hashem in the world, right? We are aware more of Hashem's grace in the world, and Hashem is actually at every moment continuing to create the world. And when we can share this with others, it opens up a new space in us to receive the perception of Hashem's actions in the world. And then that allows us to connect with people even deeper. And so that's the cycle. And that's the cycle we see with friendships and relationships and healthy relationships with children. But again, it's a model we can use with our relationship with Hashem. And not that it's easy, but it builds. One right framing of something helps you build to the next one. And that's an important piece. And I think that that's actually a beautiful piece of thinking about the Omer as a ladder or as a path, or whatever metaphor you like, is that each thing builds on the next. So, it's hard to feel like in our own, small lives that like these forces are operating, but sometimes it's useful to use an analogy of somebody really great who also has exemplified some of the highest levels of connectedness, and also some of the falling out. And of course, no one comes to mind more during the Omer than Shimon Bar Yochai. So I don't know who knows the story, but Reb Shimon and his son were hiding in a cave during a time of strife in Israel. And they survived there for 13 years with a spring of water from a spring and a carob tree. And during that time, they were, in deep deprivation, and they were on high levels of meditating and learning and spiritual inquiry. And, the Midrash says Eliyahu Navi came and learned with them. And then when they came out, after it was safe for them to come out, they went out into the world, and they were on such a high level, so elevated, and so, let's say, on fire with what ultimately we now know became the essential elements of Kabbalah, that they looked at the world and they saw the farmers in their field and they saw people going about their daily lives, and they were like enraged. They said, how could you spend your time on growing things in the field and working in your workshop? Don't you care about your spiritual life? And the Midrash says they had like laser eyes, and they like burned up, the field, and they like burned up the workshop, and they, they laid waste to whatever they looked at. Why? Because they looked at it with eyes that were empty of chesed, right? They were full of the power and fire of the Torah, but had no kindness and had no, let's say, openness to other people's reality, because they'd been living in a cave for 13 years and meditating and being incredibly spiritual. And Hashem had opened gates for them that were closed up until that point. But Hashem said to them, okay, I didn't give you these insights to burn up the world. Go back into the cave. And Hashem kept them there for 12 more months. When they came out, they saw the world in a different way. During that time, they were able to temper their, let's say, spiritual fire and see the world with eyes of compassion. And so it was in that state of having been, filled with this incredible energy and having fallen and then bringing themselves back up to it. Only then was Shimon Bar Yochai the teacher that he was meant to be. And only then was he the conduit of the Zohar and the Torah that came down in his name that people connect to, until this day. And, all kinds of people from all over the world, will celebrate on Lag BaOmer, and everybody will sing his song. And so I just, I want us to remember when we do that, it's not that Shimon Bar Yochai was only a saint. It's that, like everybody else, he was a saint in progress, right? He was moving in the world and he was making his way in the world. And Hashem saw that he was a conduit for wisdom, but he wasn't perfect. And so that's also something to be celebrated as we look at our leaders and our holy people as complex beings. So when we think about the Zohar, one of the things that I love about the word Zohar is that it means to shine. And like light shines, right? To illuminate, to light up, right? So when I think of lighting up and when I think of things that are illuminated, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is the sun, right? Hashem put the sun in the world, our sun, lots of suns all over the universe or multiverse. And the sun is calibrated to fuel all life on this little planet of ours. And we know that when we talk about, and everybody loves to talk about bringing light and the light of Torah, we know the light of Torah is not the sun. But what we do know is that the sun illuminates the world and fuels the world. And plants are calibrated to use the light of the sun to grow and start the engines of fuel on this planet of ours. But light, we can't actually see light unless it bounces off of something, right? Until it hits and comes into our eye, we don't see it. And likewise, when we look at sunlight, we perceive it as, in scientific terms, we call it white light. And what does that really mean? That means that it contains all the colors. And then if we send that white light, that sunlight, through a prism, what do we get? We get a rainbow. And if we have a spectrometer, right, we see even more than the rainbow. We see, infrared and ultraviolet and all these other things that our eyes are not designed to see. But we know that without this prism, without a spectrometer, without even the simplicity of the light from the sun bouncing off of something and coming to our eyes, we wouldn't actually see the light of the sun. So too, right, in the metaphor, but more than the metaphor, in the guidelines that Hashem gave us by giving us light, when Hashem's Torah is given, it's also been given in such a way that it's like the sunlight. Hashem's power in the world is like the sunlight. It illuminates everything. It fuels everything, and it's invisible. And we can only see it when it hits up against something, or when it's refracted, right? Reflected by something, or refracted through a prism, through any number of things that it passes through, until we see what it's made up of. And just like, if you've never seen a rainbow from a prism, the first time you see sunlight going through it, you would never believe that the light from the sun, which looks basically like nothing, or just light, white light, as we describe it, that you would believe that it had red and orange and purple and all the colors contained in it that were that had the ability to be separated out. Nobody would believe it. It just wouldn't make sense until you see it. But once you see it, you always remember it. You always remember that the light can be made to be understood in different ways through a filter. And so one of the ways that we have to understand the evolution of Torah thought is that we've been given teachers who have served us as prisms and filters for both understanding the written Torah and the oral Torah, and illuminating our lives with stories that help us understand things in ways that straightforward or incredibly complex mystical thought is not easily understood. And so, Torah at this point in our lives comes in many, many forms, but it all comes from the same source. If it's from the same source, then it has the authenticity of the same source, which is obviously Hashem. As all light comes from the sun, even if it's filtered through and reflected upon other things. And this is the way that our teachers have in the past broken down something infinite, like Hashem's love in creating the world and giving us a neshama, into manageable and useful ideas that can make our existence more meaningful and useful. And I think, one of the, let's say, the brachas, one of the meditations that we can remind ourselves, right? Because whenever we're going to do a mitzvah, big or small, right? Because all mitzvahs are both big and small. We can elevate them with an intention, right? Our kavanah. The same way that the soul and the body together are how we're built. The kavanah we put into a mitzvah is like the soul and the body uniting. And we know, right? One of our primary prayers is that, Hashem echad. God is one. God is unified. God is unity. And so, in the name of the Ramchal, who starts all of his prayers with Hashem echad, yachid, imyuchad. Hashem is one, singular, and unique. And so when we recognize that when we are trying to align ourselves with our will, with Hashem's will, and that there's a unity in that, our yearning for that, our hope to not miss the mark in that, that should give us strength and seeking that alignment as we seek to engage the world in a physical way. In this week, especially accessing Netzach, but we're always accessing Netzach in our world because we're always called upon to act as people, as neighbors, and as teachers, and as friends, and as spouses, and it's a lot to ask of us to be responsible for all of those things, but we always have to remember that when we recognize Hashem as our source, our battery pack is infinite. we can tap into that source and call upon it when we need to. And when we fail, we get back up again. So I do have more things to say, but I really would love to hear what people are thinking, if they have thoughts or if they have questions about this or other things that we can talk about together. It doesn't have to just be me.
Thank you, Rebbetzin Rachel. These are such beautiful concepts, and there's so much to unpack here, which I know we will momentarily. But for those who are watching the recording, thank you so much for tuning in. As a reminder, for Lag BaOmer, for those who are in Southern California, there will be two Lag BaOmer celebration opportunities in the morning at Dockweiler Beach for all ages, and then that same evening in partnership with Pico Shul, Rebbetzin Rachel's organization. In the evening, there will be a young professionals celebration as well. So if you're in Southern California, come out and yeah, have a wonderful week of Netzach, and we'll see you next week for Hud.